Thank you so much for your time and for joining us here at QEF.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, there's no shortage of topics to talk to you about, especially considering what Ghana's economy has gone through in the past few years. But I want to start with this because it's been a few days since Ghana secured that $3 billion bailout from the IMF. I was reading that the IMF called it an attempt to restore macroeconomic stability and debt sustainability while laying the foundation for inclusive recovery. How would you describe it in your own words?
Well, first of all, the beginning, as I say, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak about Ghana at this forum. When we came into office in 2017, the Ghanaian economy at the time was growing at about 3.4% GDP, which in fact was one of the slowest rates of growth for the last 20 years. Inflation was extremely high, interest rates were high. All the macro indices at the time were pointing in the wrong direction. And we were under an IMF program at the beginning. We took a lot of time and pains to correct the trajectory of the Ghanaian economy. And so that by the end of my first term, the annual rates of growth had gone up to 7% a year. We had now stabilized our currency. Interest rates were in a steep decline, inflation also. So that you would say that before the COVID pandemic, the Ghanaian economy had achieved macroeconomic stability and was in the process of rapid growth. Come the COVID-19 pandemic, followed, of course, by the Russia-Ukraine disaster. I don't think we could call it any other way. It had tremendous impact on our economy.
Right.
Suddenly, we were facing major challenges on our balance of payments. Our currency went into a steep decline. Interest rates went out of the window. Inflation, all the indices that had been worked on. And that is what basically forced us to go to seek the assistance of the fund.
Right.
We went in July last year.
Right. And
it has taken us July to May to secure a program. We had a staff level agreement with the fund in December. Right. It was a relatively quick period. And finally in May, we've secured the fund.
What do you attribute the delays to?
I think it's the usual negotiations with the IMF. They take time. And in fact, the 10 months which has been involved in the Ghanaian program is one of the fastest on record. There's a whole lot of stuff that you have to go through in terms of exchange of data, the negotiations, making sure that the macro indices that you are looking for are in the right direction. All of these are the ones that consume the time. But nevertheless, it's over. And now we believe that it is going to provide us with a foundation for redirecting the economy, for repositioning the Ghanaian economy, firstly, to regain the macro stability that had been lost. Secondly, to be able to have a better control over important data like interest rates, inflation. And then finally also to position us to be able to go back into the international capital market, which had been a source of funding for us for the first 3 or 4 years of our government.
Do you see that happening soon? Because I know your finance minister said there's no rush to get back.
There's no rush to get back, but nevertheless, obviously, why not? Can we not take advantage of global savings? It makes a lot of sense to be able to do that. And the sooner we can do it, better. I think that what the finance minister means is that we're going to try as much as possible to maintain the discipline which is required, which is the most important prerequisite of a successful program.
Right.
And that would mean ramping up our own domestic savings, being able to put systematic controls over public expenditure to make sure that we're always cutting our coat according to our cloth, and giving the impetus to private sector development, private sector investment. We're looking at that more than we're looking for assistance from the multilateral development banks, etc. But basically, these are the objectives that we are. At the end of it, of course, hopefully, position the economy of Ghana in such a way that we have a more diversified economy, we have a stronger economy that can withstand the exogenous shocks that we have witnessed in the last 2 or 3 years, and be able, therefore, to stand on our own feet much better in the future than we have done.
And you mentioned the discipline and the fact that it's over, but the reality is that the next tranche of funding, the $600 million, is contingent on Ghana being disciplined.
Oh, absolutely.
You've mentioned tax increases. What more have you assured the IMF that you will do?
The rationalization of our expenditures, the rationalization of government expenditures is something that we have given the assurance. The domestic revenue mobilization is absolutely critical for us. Already we're beginning to see signs of that. We are the fiscal deficit to come back within the thresholds that we have a law, a fiscal responsibility law in Ghana, which has pegged our fiscal deficits at 5%. At the moment, is way above that, and the sooner we can bring that again to a more acceptable threshold, the better it is for our economy. So these are all several areas of activity that we see as being absolutely essential for the future of our country.
How concerned are you that, I mean, Ghana next year has an election, you'll be leaving office. Are you concerned, considering inflation right now is north of 40%, there's already a lot that Ghanaians are enduring, that this could potentially hurt your party going into the next election?
I think that the global situation has not been kind to incumbent governments all over the world, and our situation will be no different. But at the same time, I believe that we have enough time. We have 18 months. I leave office in January 25, which is literally 18 months, 19 months from now, to be able, with a very disciplined approach to the implementation of the IMF program, the repositioning of our economy, to be able to bring some growth back into the economy, some relief back to our population, to be able to convince them that, yes, it's worth them continuing the journey with my party and the new leader of our party, who we'll choose in December this year, November this year.
There's been some criticism about Ghana was the first country to go through the G20 Common Framework. There's been some criticism that there are too many delays. It takes too long. We've heard the IMF director say that there's a lot of progress to be made. What would you say? What needs to be done for those other countries that are?
I think that there's a lot of validity in the criticism about the period that is involved in the con. In our case, the 11 months, the 10 to 11 months that it's taken from the time we approached the IMF in July last year to the May result is a relatively speedy exercise as far as that's concerned.
So you have no criticisms of the framework?
Because we could have wanted the program to end earlier, but nevertheless, it has been faster for us in Ghana than it has been for many other countries. So that clearly it's an area where the global community, working through the IMF and the Bank, the World Bank, needs to look at to see how more quickly they can respond to difficulties in individual economies going under the common framework of the G20
And in particular, China is the biggest bilateral creditor to Ghana. What were discussions like with them? I mean, did they contribute to part of the delay?
Yes, no. I think that China took a very positive, proactive role. They co-chaired the official creditor committee. It was the final hurdle that we had to overcome before being able to go to the fund. It was when the creditor committee met, I believe they co-chaired it with Paris, and I believe they met on the 11th of May, and China was extremely positive about giving the green light for the fund to look at the Ghanaian situation positively. Though I don't have any hesitations, any criticisms about the Chinese involvement in the Chinese involvement in the Ghanaian economy. By and large, has been very, very helpful. I know that it's a matter of controversy in the West about China. But for us, they have been strong friends, and in the time of this difficulty, they proved to be strong friends. So
Do you think the controversy has been overplayed then?
we were talking about competition amongst big powers for influence and the controversy will be generated out of that fact alone. The competition is bound to stimulate a lot of controversy. So there it is. I don't think it's of particular value to go. It's a fact that we have to deal with. Well, we deal with it on the principle that our economy, our politics, our country has historically been one that has been outward-looking, that has insisted on, as much as possible, friendship with all those who want to be friendly with Ghana. There's certain principles that have been important to us, but beyond that, we have attempted to be friendly with all countries. And China has been a strong and good friend of Ghana.
And I want to talk more about the diversification of the economy, because we know cocoa is very critical to Ghana's economy, second biggest exporter, but still not seeing the value add in the country. Where are you at in terms of being able to produce your own chocolate and export it?
Yeah, I think that continues to be a major challenge for our economy. Even though we have made considerable progress in recent years in the amount of beans that are processed domestically. I believe it's now 40% of our output, which is processed domestically. The transition to the full value chain in terms of production is still a daunting task. Fortunately, important private sector players in Ghana are beginning to look more seriously at what they need to do to be able to get into the chocolate market. As you know, in the cocoa industry, that's the high end of the value chain, is the producing of chocolate. We have a Ghanaian company, Niche, which is now making major strides to try to fill that gap. In fact, Niche has now gone so far as to establish an American production outlet facility. They'll be producing Ghanaian chocolate over there for the American market. But there's a lot that still needs to be done for us to be able to get the full value chain. I mean, the cocoa industry is amazing. It's a what, $110 billion a year industry? And the producing countries, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, who between the two are responsible for some 66, 67% of world output.
Right.
Don't even make 10% of the value of that industry.
Right.
And that is the reason why the need for us to intensify measures and the policies that would allow us to get there has become so critical.
And the EU is very critical to that as well, because the EU makes up 60% of Ghana's cocoa exports. But there's legislation that could potentially put that at risk in terms of deforestation and child labor if the traceability is not fully disclosed.
I have no doubt that we will meet the requirements of the EU legislation.
Is the EU critical, though, to the success of Ghana's cocoa industry?
The EU has posed some questions. We have done our best to respond to it. Several meetings have taken place both in Accra and in Brussels to explain the topography of the Ghanaian industry, to show exactly what is done. And we're confident that the allegation that child labor forms an important part of our cocoa output is not an allegation that has any foundation, in fact, and that we will, when the legislation is enacted, that we will meet the requirements of the legislation. We're very confident.
Are you willing to look to other markets, though, to not be so reliant on the EU
absolutely.
or other products?
Oh, absolutely. Apart from ramping up the products, Asia represents a new huge market, both India and China itself and other parts of Asia. They all represent a huge new market, and we're making systematic efforts to introduce Ghanaian cocoa into those markets and to penetrate those markets. We have to do that. We can't be reliant on only just one outlet, which we've been historically. We've seen the difficulties involved in that, especially since we're committed to expanding the output of our cocoa. Hopefully, being able by the end of this decade at least to have doubled it. We need to get much closer to the Ivorian output that we have done so far.
Are there other, I know you were meeting with the Emir of Qatar, you're talking about agriculture exports. What other crops do you see as a potential opportunity for Ghana to benefit in addition to cocoa?
Of course, cassava is an important thing. Sugar, cassava, we're looking at our poultry industry, we're looking generally at tree crops, mango, soya beans, rubber. These are all products that we're placing a lot of emphasis on and trying to mobilize the infrastructural support for the expansion of all of these products. So we're looking at a broad range of products in Ghana that will be the subject of this diversification.
Potentially bartering gold for oil as well?
That's happening already.
Still on the table?
It's very much on the table. And it's helping. It's helping in terms of its impact on our dollar outflows. It's helping in terms of the stability of the prices that we're paying for our oil, etc. Generally, it's proving to be quite beneficial to us.
All right, a lot to look out for, Mr. President. You said 18 months in office?
Yes, that's what I have
18,
left.
he's counting the hours and the days. Thank you so much for joining us at QEF. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. Thank you.